If you've ever walked out to your garden in July and found tiny zucchini turning yellow, then soft, then falling off before they ever had a chance to grow, then you're not alone. And I want to tell you something that surprised me many years ago. Most people think the plant is sick, and the first thing they do is buy expensive sprays or fertilizers, hoping they can save the harvest. I used to do exactly the same thing, and every summer, I watched beautiful young fruits disappear one after another while the leaves looked healthy and the plant seemed strong. The frustrating part is that every lost zucchini feels like food that should have ended up on your table instead of rotting in the garden. What finally changed everything for me was realizing that the problem was not where I had been looking. Most gardeners make one simple mistake without even knowing it, and the plant quietly pays the price. The sad thing is that the plant often gives us clear signs long before those little fruits begin to rot. But because we expect a disease, we completely miss what it is trying to tell us. I remember an older gardener showing me something that looked almost too simple to matter. He smiled and said that people spend money because simple answers are easy to ignore. At first, I did not believe him because the method cost almost nothing and took only a few minutes, but after trying it, I watched healthy zucchini stay on the plant instead of dropping to the ground. Since then, I have repeated the same routine every summer, and I have seen the difference with my own eyes. That is why today I want to walk you through every step exactly as I do it in my own garden. I will show you why young zucchini fail in the hottest part of summer, and why most expensive products never solve the real cause. Then I will share the old methods that helped me keep the plants producing for weeks longer without filling the garden with chemicals. Some of these little tricks were shown to me many years ago, and some I learned through my own mistakes, but together they changed the way I grow zucchini forever. And before we get to the first simple step, there is one mistake that almost everyone makes during watering, and it quietly starts the whole problem without them ever noticing. For a long time, I believed that July heat alone was ruining my zucchini because everyone around me kept saying that summer simply becomes too hot for the plants. But after watching the same beds year after year, I realized the weather was only part of the story. The real trouble often starts because we unknowingly make the plant work much harder than it should. One mistake I see again and again is giving the plants a little water every evening, instead of watering them deeply when they truly need it. At first, it feels like we are helping because the soil looks wet on top, but only the surface gets moisture while the deeper roots stay thirsty. Then the next hot afternoon comes, and the plant struggles to support all those big leaves and new fruits at the same time. When it cannot keep up, it begins sacrificing the youngest zucchini because that is the easiest way for the plant to survive. Many people think insects or diseases are attacking, but in reality, the plant is simply protecting itself. I learned this lesson from an older neighbor who had been growing vegetables long before garden centers started filling shelves with expensive bottles. He told me that healthy roots are worth more than a cabinet full of products, and those words stayed with me. After I changed the way I watered, everything started looking different. Instead of watering a little every evening, I began watering slowly and deeply early in the morning, so the moisture reached far below the surface where the strongest roots were waiting. Then I covered the soil with a simple layer of dry grass and old leaves because very few people realize how much moisture disappears under the hot July sun. That thin layer kept the soil cooler for much longer, and the plants no longer had to fight through every afternoon. I also stopped splashing water over the leaves because wet leaves during warm weather can encourage unnecessary problems, while the roots are the part that truly needs attention. None of this required expensive equipment or special chemicals, and that is probably why so many people overlook it. Sometimes the oldest methods stay alive because they quietly work season after season without attracting much attention. But watering is only one piece of the puzzle because there is another hidden reason why beautiful young zucchini suddenly turn yellow, even when the soil seems perfect. And that is where most gardeners lose even more fruit without realizing what is really happening. There was another lesson that completely changed the way I looked at zucchini, and I only understood it after making the same mistake for several summers. I used to walk through the garden every morning, and whenever I saw a tiny fruit turning yellow, I blamed the soil or the weather. I never thought to look at the flower that had been attached to that little zucchini just a day before. Then an older gardener asked me one simple question. Did you see any bees on your plants this morning? I honestly could not answer because I had never paid attention. That question stayed with me, and the next morning I went outside just after sunrise with a cup of coffee and watched the plants instead of rushing to work. I noticed that some flowers were busy with bees while others stayed untouched until they closed. A few days later, the fruits from those untouched flowers began turning yellow and dropping exactly like before. That was the moment I realized the plant was not failing. It simply had not been properly pollinated. Without complete pollination, the plant has no reason to spend energy growing that young fruit, so it quietly lets it go. Most people never notice this because the flowers only stay open for a short time, and by the afternoon, the opportunity has already passed. Since then, I have stopped thinking that every yellow fruit means something is wrong underground. Sometimes the answer is flying right above the leaves. One simple habit helped me more than I expected. I stopped using strong sprays around flowering time, even natural ones, unless they were absolutely necessary because I wanted bees to visit without disturbance. I also planted a few simple flowers close to my vegetable bed, and suddenly there was much more activity every morning. On cloudy days or during rainy periods when almost no insects were working, I sometimes helped the plants myself. I gently took a small, soft brush and moved pollen from a freshly opened male flower to the center of a female flower. It takes less than a minute, and many people never think about doing it, but the difference can be surprising when pollinators are scarce. The best part is that this method costs nothing at all and can save fruits that would otherwise be lost. I have repeated it many times over the years, and every successful harvest reminds me that some of the best gardening solutions are the simplest ones. But even when watering is correct and pollination is successful, there is still one hidden problem inside the plant itself that can quietly cause young zucchini to rot before they ever begin growing, and that is the next thing I always check before worrying about anything else. The next thing I always check is something that many gardeners never even think about because the plant can look green, healthy, and full of flowers while quietly struggling on the inside. Years ago, I believed that if the leaves looked good, then the roots must also be doing well. But I learned that zucchini can hide its problems for quite a while before the fruits begin paying the price. One of the biggest hidden reasons for yellowing and rotting young zucchini is that the plant cannot move enough nutrients to support all the new growth during the hottest weeks of summer. It is not always because the soil is poor. Sometimes the roots are simply under stress from heat, uneven watering, or soil that has become too hard after repeated drying. When that happens, the plant starts making difficult choices. It keeps the older leaves alive because they collect sunlight, but it stops investing energy into the smallest fruits. That is why everything can seem fine until you notice another tiny zucchini beginning to turn yellow. An older gardener showed me a simple habit that I still follow every July. Once every week, I gently loosen only the very top layer of soil around the plant, without digging deeply or disturbing the roots. I stay several inches away from the main stem because zucchini roots spread close to the surface and damage comes easily if you work too aggressively. This light loosening allows water to soak in more evenly after irrigation and helps fresh air reach the roots instead of letting the surface become a hard crust. Right after that, I add a little homemade compost around the plant or a thin layer of well-rotted composted manure if I have it available. I do not pile it against the stem because that can create unnecessary moisture around the base. Instead, I spread it in a circle where the feeding roots are growing. Every time I water, the nutrients slowly move into the soil without shocking the plant or forcing rapid leafy growth. This old method has always given me steadier results than trying to solve every problem with strong fertilizers. Most people think feeding means adding more and more products, but healthy plants often respond better to small, steady care than to heavy treatments. Within a week or two, I usually notice stronger new fruit staying green instead of falling away, and the plants continue producing through the hottest part of summer. But there is still one mistake that quietly destroys many zucchini harvests. Even when the roots are healthy, the watering is correct and pollination has been successful. And that mistake is much easier to make than most people realize. Now we come to the mistake that I believe causes more disappointment than almost anything else. And the hardest part is that it usually comes from good intentions. Many gardeners see a zucchini plant covered with large green leaves and beautiful flowers, so they decide to help it by giving even more fertilizer. I used to think exactly the same way. I believed that if a little fertilizer was good, then a little more had to be even better. What actually happened was that the plants grew bigger leaves and thicker stems, but the young fruits kept turning yellow and dropping. It took me several seasons before I understood what was happening. The plant was putting too much of its energy into growing leaves instead of supporting the new zucchini. From that day forward, I stopped trying to force fast growth and started paying much closer attention to what the plant was telling me. If the leaves were already deep green and healthy, I left them alone instead of feeding again. Sometimes the best thing you can do is simply stop interfering. Another habit I changed was removing old damaged leaves from the bottom of the plant. I never remove too many at once because the leaves are still feeding the plant, but every week I carefully cut away a few that were touching the soil or had become yellow and tired. This improves air movement through the plant and helps the morning sun dry away moisture much faster. Very few people realize how much better zucchini performs when fresh air can move freely between the stems. I also make it a habit to check the plants every morning instead of waiting until evening. Problems are easier to notice while the leaves are fresh and standing upright. If I see a small fruit beginning to soften, I remove it immediately instead of leaving it on the plant, because a rotting fruit attracts insects and keeps the plant wasting energy on something that will never develop. This simple routine takes only a few minutes, but it has saved me many healthy fruits over the years. None of these habits require expensive products or special equipment, and that is probably why they are often forgotten today. They came from gardeners who learned by watching their plants every single day instead of searching for quick solutions. After I combined these small changes with deep watering, careful feeding, and better pollination, my zucchini plants stayed productive much longer than they ever had before. But there is one final habit that ties all of these simple methods together. And once I made it part of my routine, the difference in my harvest became impossible to ignore. The biggest change did not happen because I discovered one miracle trick. It happened because I stopped looking for one big solution and started following a simple routine every week. That routine has stayed almost the same for years because it continues to work without costing much money or taking hours of hard work. Every morning while the weather is still cool, I walk through the garden with a cup of coffee and spend just a few quiet minutes looking at each zucchini plant. I check the new flowers, I look under the leaves, I touch the soil with my hand instead of guessing whether it needs water. If everything looks healthy, I leave the plant alone because one lesson I have learned is that healthy plants do not need constant interference. They simply need steady care. When I see a flower that has not been visited by bees during a quiet rainy week, I help with pollination myself. When I notice the top layer of soil becoming dry and hard, I loosen it gently and water deeply instead of giving the plant a quick splash every evening. If I find an old leaf lying on the ground, I remove it before it becomes a place where moisture and disease can build. These little habits seem almost too ordinary to matter, but together they create the kind of conditions that zucchini plants have always needed. The interesting thing is that many older gardeners followed these same habits long before shelves were filled with expensive garden products. They watched their plants closely because observation was their best tool. That is probably the most valuable lesson I have ever learned. The garden tells you what it needs if you slow down enough to notice. After I adopted this way of gardening, my harvest became much more reliable. Instead of watching one young zucchini after another turn yellow, I started seeing them grow larger every day until it was time to pick them. The plants stayed productive well into the season, and I spent less money trying to fix problems that simple care could prevent. There is something deeply satisfying about walking into the garden, knowing that the methods you are using are simple, affordable, and proven by years of experience. Every healthy zucchini feels like proof that patience and careful attention still matter. And even now, after all these years, I still learn something new every season, because every garden has its own small lessons waiting for anyone willing to slow down and look a little closer. The final habit I want to share is perhaps the easiest of all, but it is also the one that brings everything together and helps keep your zucchini producing until the season begins to fade. When I look back at all the summers I have spent growing zucchini, I realize that the biggest improvement did not come from buying better tools or trying the newest products on the market. It came from understanding that healthy plants respond best to simple, steady care given at the right time. That idea has saved me money, reduced my work, and filled my kitchen with more fresh zucchini than I used to think was possible. Every July, I follow the same quiet routine because it has earned my trust through many seasons. I water deeply instead of often. I keep the soil covered so it stays cool. I watch the flowers during the morning when pollination matters most. I avoid feeding the plants more than they actually need. I remove damaged fruits before they waste the plant's strength, and I spend a few peaceful minutes simply observing, instead of rushing to fix problems that may not even exist. These habits may sound ordinary, but together they create the conditions that zucchini plants have needed for generations. That is why many of these methods have survived for so long. They are simple because they work. I hope this video helps you look at your own garden a little differently the next time you see a young zucchini beginning to turn yellow. Instead of assuming the harvest is lost, you will know exactly where to begin looking, and you will have several easy steps that cost little or nothing to try before spending money on expensive treatments. There is something deeply satisfying about solving a problem with knowledge instead of products. Every healthy zucchini you harvest after that becomes a reminder that careful observation is often the best gardening tool you already own. I still get excited every time I walk into the garden and see another healthy fruit growing where one might have fallen off in the past, because it reminds me that small changes repeated consistently can produce surprisingly big results. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I truly hope these old practical methods bring you the same success they have brought me over the years. If they do, then your July harvest may become one of the best you have ever enjoyed. And if you think this was useful, stay with me because next time, I want to show you another forgotten gardening habit that quietly helps zucchini plants keep producing long after most gardens begin slowing down.